On Christmas Eve, a millionaire businessman believes his mother is well cared for, until he receives a desperate call that is brutally cut off. When he returns home unexpectedly, he finds an unimaginable scene that reveals years of hidden suffering beneath a veneer of perfection. But nothing prepares him for the final twist. The woman he loves did not act alone, and the true traitor is even closer than he imagines. If this story interests you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us which city you are watching from. Let's continue. Christmas Eve in New York City brought with it the unmistakable scent of cinnamon and the glow of lights decorating the streets of the Upper East Side. It was a night when families gathered, when hugs and laughter filled homes, and when the hope of a new year seemed tangible in the crisp city air. But inside the three-story mansion of the Sterling family, silence weighed like lead on the shoulders of Mrs. Eleanor. She was sitting in the rocking chair in her bedroom, a room located on the second floor, far from the bustle of the house. The walls were too white, too cold. The minimalist decor that Victoria, her daughter-in-law, had imposed years ago did not match Eleanor's warm spirit. There were no photographs on the walls, no fresh flowers on the nightstand, only a small cross and an old wooden box that she kept as if it were the last piece of a world that no longer existed. Eleanor was 73 years old and carried on her face the marks of a lifetime dedicated to her family. She had raised Robert, her only son, with all the love a mother could offer. After her husband passed away years ago, she took on the role of both father and mother, working tirelessly to ensure the boy had an education, opportunities, and a bright future. And Robert delivered. He became a successful entrepreneur, owner of a technology retail chain that spread across the country. He was respected, admired, and prosperous. But prosperity came at a price. Robert lived between meetings, trips, and commitments that kept him away from home most of the time. He fully trusted Victoria, his wife, to take care of his mother. After all, Victoria always appeared so attentive when he was around. She always had a smile on her lips, always asked if Mrs. Eleanor needed anything, and always seemed genuinely concerned about her mother-in-law's well-being. What Robert didn't know was that the smile vanished as soon as the front door closed. Eleanor heard Victoria's footsteps downstairs. She recognized the sound of high-heeled sandals clicking on the marble of the living room. It was a sound that made her shrink a little further into her chair, making her grip the wooden box in her lap more tightly. Inside it, she kept old letters, faded photographs of when Robert was a child, a wedding ring that had belonged to her husband, and a small rosary her own mother had given her decades ago. They were memories of a time when she felt loved, valued, and needed. Now she felt like a burden, a nuisance, an inconvenient presence in her own home. Victoria was 38 years old, with impeccably straightened blonde hair and a refined taste for designer clothes. She came from a traditional family in Connecticut, but without the same fortune she had acquired by marrying Robert. She knew exactly how to behave in public, how to charm her husband's friends, and how to maintain appearances. But inside the house, away from the eyes of others, she revealed herself to be a completely different person. To Victoria, Eleanor represented an obstacle. Her mother-in-law was a constant reminder that Robert had simple roots, that his family did not come from the high society elite. Worse still, Eleanor insisted on giving advice, questioning decisions, and maintaining traditions that Victoria considered outdated and embarrassing. The solution she found was simple: isolate the old lady. Keep her away from visitors, away from parties, and away from any opportunity to expose her simplicity. In the beginning, it was small things. Victoria started serving Eleanor's meals in her room, claiming the stairs were too tiring for the lady. Then she discouraged old friends from visiting, always with polite excuses about Mrs. Eleanor's fatigue or invented commitments. Gradually, Eleanor's world shrank, reduced to the four white walls of that freezing room. And when Robert asked, Victoria always had a ready answer. His mother was fine, just a bit tired. She preferred to rest. She was happy that way, without much fuss. Robert believed her because he wanted to believe her, because it was easier to believe, because his days were already complicated enough with spreadsheets, contracts, and competitors. On that Christmas Eve, Eleanor looked out the window and saw the lights of the neighboring houses. She imagined families gathered, children playing, and the smell of dinner spreading through the kitchens. Her grandson, Michael, only 5 years old, was downstairs with his mother. She could hear his laughter every now and then, a sound that warmed her heart and broke it at the same time. It had been weeks since she had seen him properly. Victoria always had a reason to keep the boy away from his grandmother. She said Eleanor was tired, that she needed silence, that the child made too much noise. The truth was that Victoria didn't want Michael to get attached to his grandmother. She didn't want the boy to witness the way she treated Eleanor. Because, although she had never raised a hand against her mother-in-law directly, Victoria had other equally effective weapons: cutting words, looks of contempt, prolonged silences. She ignored Eleanor for days, denied her small comforts, and controlled every aspect of her routine. The elderly woman couldn't choose what to eat, what clothes to wear, or when to leave her room. And worst of all was the constant humiliation. Victoria made a point of treating Eleanor like an incompetent child, incapable of making her own decisions. She spoke loudly, as if the lady were deaf or confused. She corrected her in front of strangers. She made subtle comments about her appearance, her age, and her uselessness. Eleanor had learned it was better not to react. Any attempt to defend herself resulted in even more difficult days. Victoria had a gift for making life miserable in ways that left no visible marks. And always, she managed to convince Robert that it was all just a misunderstanding, the exaggerated sensitivity of an elderly lady. That night, however, something was different. Eleanor felt an unusual tension in the air. Victoria had been particularly irritated all day. Robert had called in the morning saying he would need to stay one more day in Washington, D.C. for a last-minute meeting. The news made Victoria's eyes sparkle in a way Eleanor knew well. It was the spark of someone who knew they would have total freedom, without supervision, without having to pretend. During dinner, which Victoria had insisted on serving in Eleanor's room again, the words were particularly sharp. Comments about how the mother-in-law was a stone in her path, how her presence made everything harder, how it would be better if she were somewhere else. Eleanor swallowed every word in silence, chewing bread that felt like sand in her mouth. After Victoria left, taking the nearly untouched tray, Eleanor felt the familiar weight of loneliness. But this time there was something more. A fear. A feeling that something bad was about to happen. Her hands trembled as she opened the wooden box and took out an object she had kept for years, an old cell phone that had belonged to her husband. She kept it charged and hidden for emergencies. She had never needed to use it until that night. With trembling fingers, she dialed Robert's number. It rang once, twice. Eleanor's heart hammered in her chest. When she finally heard her son's voice, the words came out rushed, heavy with urgency and fear. She begged him to come home. She said she needed him, that something was not right. Robert, confused and worried, was trying to understand what was happening when the bedroom door burst open. Victoria entered like a hurricane, eyes flashing with rage. She snatched the phone from Eleanor's hands and put the device to her ear. The voice she used now was completely different, sweet, worried, understanding. She explained to Robert that his mother was having one of those moments of confusion that had been happening more frequently lately, that perhaps it was time to consider professional help, maybe even a more suitable place for specialized care. She assured him that everything was under control, that he didn't need to worry, and that he could finish his business in peace. Robert hesitated. Eleanor could hear his voice on the other side of the line, questioning, trying to understand. But Victoria was convincing. She always had. Devine. When she hung up the phone, the smile disappeared instantly from her face. What happened next, Eleanor preferred not to remember in detail. There was no physical assault, but there was something equally devastating. Victoria led her, gripping her arm firmly down the stairs. Their footsteps echoed in the empty house. Michael had already been put to bed. There were no witnesses. Under the mansion's main staircase, there was a small closet that served as storage. It was narrow, dark, and poorly ventilated. Victoria opened the door and, with surprising strength for someone so delicate in appearance, pushed Eleanor inside. It wasn't the first time. The sound of the door being locked from the outside echoed like a sentence. Eleanor was alone in the darkness, surrounded by the smell of dust and cleaning products. She could hear, distant and muffled, the sound of the television playing Christmas carols. The irony was cruel. Outside, the world celebrated love, unity, and hope. Inside, she faced her worst nightmare. Eleanor curled up in the corner of the closet, hugging her knees to her chest. Silent tears flowed down her wrinkled face. She thought of Robert, of how her son knew nothing, of how she had failed to protect herself. She thought of Michael, of what kind of example was being set for that innocent child. She thought of her own life, of how she had reached this point. Meanwhile, upstairs in one of the staff rooms, Joan couldn't sleep. She had worked as the Sterling family's housekeeper for 3 years. She was a 42-year-old woman, mother of 2 children who attended public school. She needed that job. She needed the salary. But the weight of her conscience was becoming unbearable. Joan knew. She had seen and heard things that tormented her. She had witnessed the way Victoria treated Mrs. Eleanor when she thought no one was looking. She had heard the cruel comments, witnessed the constant humiliation. And that night, she had heard the argument, heard the footsteps on the stairs, heard the sound of the closet door being locked. Her heart was divided. On one side, the fear of losing her job, of not being able to support her children. On the other, the guilt of remaining silent in the face of such injustice. Joan had tried a few times to comfort Mrs. Eleanor in secret. She brought her hot tea, an extra blanket, kind words whispered when Victoria wasn't around, but she knew it wasn't enough. Weeks ago, Joan had made a risky decision. In a moment of courage, she had managed to record a video of one of the scenes where Victoria verbally humiliated Eleanor. She kept the file on her phone, not knowing exactly what to do with it. She was afraid to use it, afraid of the consequences. But she couldn't delete it either. It was proof. It was the truth recorded. That night, after hearing Eleanor being locked in the closet, Joan took her phone with trembling hands. She had to do something. She needed someone to know. She tried to transfer the video to a storage device, thinking of keeping it in a safe place. But in her haste and nervousness, she made a mistake. Instead of saving the file locally, the app sent the video to an old email address that was synced to the device. An email that, by coincidence, belonged to a corporate account that Robert rarely checked but was still active. The file was sent. The evidence was in the digital ether, waiting to be discovered. Joan didn't notice the error. Immediately. She just put the phone away and stayed awake, staring at the ceiling, praying that somehow justice would prevail. Downstairs, locked in the dark closet, Mrs. Eleanor also prayed. She prayed for morning to come. She prayed that her son would somehow see the truth. She prayed that there was still time to change the story. Morning arrived, with the soft light that precedes Christmas Day. New York was waking up slowly, still wrapped in the characteristic winter fog. In the streets of the Upper East Side, the houses were beginning to show signs of life. Families woke up. To prepare lunch, children ran to see the presents under the tree, and the aroma of fresh coffee spread through the kitchens. In the Sterling mansion, however, the morning brought a heavy and uncomfortable silence. Victoria came down the stairs in her beige silk robe, her hair still tied in a perfect bun. Her steps were measured, calculated. She had slept deeply, without remorse, without guilt. To her, what she had done the night before was just a necessary measure. Eleanor needed to learn not to interfere, not to cause problems, to accept her place. As she passed the main staircase, Victoria cast a quick glance at the closet door. It was locked exactly as she had left it. There was no rush to open it. Let the old woman stay there a little longer, reflecting on her actions. That was how Victoria operated. Control. Power. Absolute dominance over every aspect of that house. Joan was already in the kitchen when Victoria entered. The housekeeper had spent the night awake, tormented by her conscience. Her eyes were swollen from fatigue and worry. She prepared breakfast with automatic movements, but her mind was completely focused on that closet under the stairs. Mrs. Eleanor had been in there for hours, hours of darkness, cold and loneliness. "Good morning, Joan," Victoria said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Just prepare coffee for me and juice for Michael. My mother-in-law won't be having breakfast with us today. She's resting." Joan pressed her lips together, holding back the words that wanted to escape. "Yes, Mrs. Sterling," she replied in a low voice, avoiding looking directly at her employer. Victoria noticed the tension but didn't care. She was used to seeing fear in the eyes of the staff. That was how things worked. Respect through fear. Obedience through the implicit threat of dismissal. She served herself coffee, flipped through a decor magazine, and mentally planned how she would spend that Christmas day without the inconvenient presence of her mother-in-law. Meanwhile, on the other side of the coast, in the hotel where he was staying in Washington, D.C., Robert Sterling woke up with a strange feeling in his chest. There was something about the call from the night before that bothered him deeply. His mother's voice, so scared, so urgent, and then Victoria's explanation, so convincing, and yet so cold. Robert was 42 years old and had built his empire from scratch. He was an intelligent man, sharp in business, capable of detecting lies and manipulations when it came to contracts and partnerships. But when the subject was his family, especially his wife, there seemed to be a blind spot. He wanted to believe that everything was fine, that his mother was being cared for, that Victoria was the perfect daughter-in-law she appeared to be. But that morning, alone in the hotel room, away from the distractions of business, Robert couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. He picked up his phone and thought about calling home. It was only 7 in the morning, perhaps too early. He decided to wait a bit, take a shower, and organize his thoughts. While he was getting ready, his gaze fell on the laptop on the desk. He had some accumulated emails from the old corporate account he rarely used. On impulse, he decided to check it. Perhaps an important client had tried to contact him. He opened the notebook, logged in, and began scrolling through the emails. Spam, automatic notifications, newsletters. He was about to close it when an email with no subject caught his eye. The sender was unknown. There was no text, just a video file attached. Robert frowned. It could be a virus, some kind of malicious spam, but something made him click. Perhaps intuition, perhaps chance, perhaps fate doing its silent work. The video began to load. The quality wasn't the best, clearly recorded with a phone discreetly. Robert recognized the setting immediately. It was his home's dining room, and there was his mother, sitting at the table with a plate in front of her. Robert's heart began to beat faster. He turned up the volume. Victoria's voice echoed through the video, but it was a voice Robert had never heard before. Cold, cutting, full of contempt. "Do you really think anyone cares what you have to say? Your opinions are as outdated as your clothes. Do us a favor and stay quiet. No one here wants to hear your whining about the past." The camera shook slightly but kept recording. Eleanor had her head down, her hands trembling as she held a fork. Her voice came out weak, almost inaudible. "I just wanted to know if Robert will arrive in time for dinner tomorrow." Victoria's laugh was cruel. "Robert? He's busy building an empire. He doesn't have time to listen to an old woman complain. Besides, I've already thought about talking to him about finding a more suitable place for you. A home, where people your age can stay together, away from those who actually matter." The words that followed were even worse, Victoria continued, each sentence like a sharp blade, cutting away piece by piece of Eleanor's dignity. She spoke about how the mother-in-law was a burden, how she embarrassed the family with her simple ways, how it would be better if she simply disappeared. Robert watched the video with wide eyes, blood boiling in his veins. This couldn't be real. That couldn't be his wife. That couldn't be his mother being treated that way. But it was. It was all real. Every word, every gesture of contempt, every second of that video was a brutal truth he had failed to see. The video ended abruptly. Robert stood still, staring at the black screen, breathing heavily. His hands were shaking. He felt a wave of nausea rise in his stomach. How had he not noticed? How had he been so blind? How many times had his mother tried to tell him something, and he simply didn't want to hear? Without thinking twice, Robert picked up the phone and called his secretary. "Cancel everything, all of today's appointments. I'm returning to New York immediately. I need a car now." The woman on the other end tried to argue, mentioning important meetings and contracts that needed to be signed. Robert didn't want to hear it. "Now," he repeated, and hung up. As he packed his things in a hurry, Robert's mind worked at an accelerated pace. He thought of all the signs he had ignored, the times he arrived home. And his mother was always in her room. Victoria's excuses about Eleanor being tired, wanting rest, the occasions when he tried to talk to his mother, and she seemed distant, even scared. It all made sense now, a horrible, devastating sense. Back at the mansion in New York, Michael had woken up. The 5-year-old boy ran down the stairs, excited for Christmas. "Grandma Eleanor! Grandma Eleanor!" he called as he ran. "I want to show Grandma my drawing." Victoria intercepted her son in the hallway. "Michael, Grandma is resting. We can't disturb her now. Come have breakfast with me." "But I made a drawing for her," the boy insisted, holding a crumpled piece of paper in his small hands. "It's a Christmas surprise." Victoria looked at the paper, and her face contorted slightly. It was a child's drawing, made with colored pencils. It showed 2 figures, a large one with yellow hair and an expression that could be interpreted as angry, another small one, huddled in a corner, with tears running down a crudely drawn face. "What a pretty drawing," Victoria said in a controlled voice, snatching the paper from her son's hands. "I'll save it to show Grandma later. Now come eat." Michael hesitated, sensing something was wrong, but obeyed. Children have a sharp perception of tension, even if they don't fully understand what is happening. He felt the heavy atmosphere in the house, noticed his mother was more irritated than usual, and realized his grandmother hadn't appeared in days. As they ate breakfast, Victoria thought about the next step. She needed to maintain control of the situation. Robert had seemed suspicious on the call the night before. She needed to reinforce the narrative. Perhaps it was time to really start planting the idea that Eleanor was losing her mental faculties, that she needed specialized care. Joan watched everything from the kitchen, her heart tight. She had made the mistake of sending the video to the wrong place, but she didn't know that yet. She believed the evidence was safely stored, waiting for the right moment. What she didn't imagine was that the accidental error would be the key to changing everything. In the closet under the stairs, Eleanor was semi-conscious. The lack of proper air, the cold of the night, and the emotional trauma had taken their toll. She drifted between wakefulness and a state of torpor, remembering fragments of her life. She saw her husband smiling, saw Robert as a child running through the garden, saw her own mother singing lullabies. The good memories mixed with the cruel reality of the present. She had tried to knock on the door a few times during the night, but her strength was limited. Now she didn't even try anymore. She just waited. Waited for the day to come, for someone to find her, for that nightmare to somehow end. It was almost 10 in the morning when the mansion's intercom rang. Joan answered. It was Mr. Arthur, the building's superintendent, saying he had come to check a reported problem with the house's water system. Victoria reluctantly authorized his entry. One more person in the house meant one more person who would need to be deceived. Arthur was a 58-year-old man who had worked in that luxury complex for over 20 years. He knew all the families, all the unspoken secrets, all the facades. He had always had a special affection for Mrs. Eleanor. In the times when she could still go out, she always greeted him with genuine kindness, asked about his family, and remembered his children's names. In recent months, Arthur had noticed Eleanor's absence. Whenever he asked, he received the same polite and empty response from Victoria about the mother-in-law resting, preferring to stay indoors. But something about those answers always bothered him. There was a coldness, a rush to change the subject. That morning, while checking the external pipes of the house, Arthur heard a strange sound. It was muffled, almost imperceptible. It came from inside the house. He stopped, paying attention. There it was again. A low groan, the sound of someone in pain. Arthur rang the doorbell. Victoria opened the door with a forced smile. "Is everything okay out there, Mr. Arthur?" "Yes, Mrs. Sterling, but I heard a strange noise coming from inside here. Are you okay? Is there someone needing help?" Victoria's smile faltered for a fraction of a second. "No, everything is fine. It must be the television. Michael was watching cartoons a moment ago. But it didn't sound like it was coming from the living room, Arthur insisted, something in his instincts as an honest working man alerting him that something was wrong. It seemed to come from right here near the stairs. Victoria felt panic begin to rise, but she maintained her composure. You are mistaken. As I said, everything is fine. If you've finished the external work, I thank you. Arthur was not one to give up easily. He had seen a lot in his years of work. Families perfect on the outside, rotten on the inside, wealth hiding human misery. And in that moment, looking into Victoria's eyes, he saw something that made him make a decision. With all due respect, Mrs. Sterling, I need to check. If there is someone needing help in this house, it is my duty as superintendent to ensure everyone is okay, especially Mrs. Eleanor. I haven't seen her in a long time. I'd like to wish her a Merry Christmas. Victoria's blood ran cold. The situation was spiraling out of control. She couldn't let Arthur in. She couldn't let him discover Eleanor locked in that closet. She tried to block the way, but Arthur had already taken a step forward. That was when the sound came again, louder this time, an unmistakable groan of pain coming from the closet under the stairs. Arthur's eyes widened. Without asking permission, he walked straight to the closet door. Victoria tried to stop him, but it was too late. Arthur turned the handle. It was locked. Where is the key? He asked in a low, controlled voice, but with a firmness that accepted no refusal. Victoria was cornered. Her thoughts raced. She could invent an excuse, claim it was a private space, threaten to sue Arthur for trespassing, but the man in front of her was no longer the polite, subservient superintendent. He was someone determined to do the right thing. I will call the police if you don't open this door right now, Arthur said, taking his phone from his pocket. At that moment, Joan appeared from the hallway. She had heard everything, and for the first time in 3 years she found the courage she needed. I have a spare key, she said in a firm voice, walking to a small utility cupboard. She took out the key and handed it directly to Arthur. Victoria was pale, breathing fast. The situation had exploded completely out of her control. Everything she had built, the entire carefully maintained facade, was about to crumble. Arthur put the key in the lock and turned it. The door opened, revealing the darkness of the small space. And there, huddled in the corner, fragile and scared as a child, was Mrs. Eleanor. Her eyes blinked at the sudden light. Her clothes were wrinkled, her face marked by dried tears. The silence that followed was deafening. Joan put her hands to her mouth, stifling a sob. Arthur stood paralyzed for a second, processing the horrible scene before him, and Victoria knew that her life, as she knew it, had ended at that very moment. The scene that unfolded in those first minutes after the closet was opened would be engraved forever in the memory of everyone present. Arthur knelt slowly, extending his hand to Eleanor with the delicacy of someone touching something precious and fragile. Mrs. Eleanor, it's me, Arthur. You're safe now. Let's get you out of there. Eleanor looked at him as if she couldn't process that this was real. Her lips moved, trying to form words, but no sound came out. She was in deep shock, her body trembling uncontrollably. Arthur noticed the marks on her wrists, where she had leaned against the hard walls of the closet during the night. He saw the sickly pallor of her face. Her lips cracked from dehydration. With extreme care, he helped the lady stand up. Her legs could barely support her. Joan ran to the other side, supporting Eleanor by the arm. Together, they led the elderly woman to the living room sofa. The daylight streaming through the windows seemed to blind Eleanor, who had spent so many hours in absolute darkness. Victoria remained paralyzed in the hallway, her face transformed into a mask of controlled panic. Her mind worked frantically, seeking an exit, a plausible explanation, something that could reverse this catastrophic situation. But for the first time in years, she was completely without arguments. Joan, bring water. A blanket and call 911, Arthur ordered in a firm voice. Then he looked directly at Victoria. And you, don't leave this house. I'm calling Mr. Robert right now. No, Victoria began, her voice coming out higher than usual. You don't understand. She gets confused sometimes. She locks herself in. I was going to open the door later. I was just waiting for her to calm down. Arthur cut her off with a look that dismissed any explanation. Mrs. Eleanor was locked from the outside. The key was on the outside of the door. Don't try to deceive me. I've seen enough in this life to recognize cruelty when I see it. Michael appeared at the top of the stairs, rubbing his eyes, drawn by the raised voices. "Mommy, what's happening? Is Grandma okay?" Victoria ran up the stairs, picked her son up, and took him back to his room. "Stay here and play, my love. Mommy needs to take care of some things." Her voice was tense, brittle. Michael looked at her with that startling perception children have, sensing that something very serious was happening. Meanwhile, Joan returned with water and a blanket. She knelt beside Eleanor and offered the glass. The lady managed to drink in small sips, her hands still shaking too much to hold the glass alone. "I'm so sorry, Mrs. Eleanor," Joan whispered, tears flowing freely down her face. "I should have done something sooner. I should have been braver." Eleanor looked at her, and for the first time since being taken from the closet, her features softened slightly. "It wasn't your fault," she managed to murmur in a raspy, weak voice. "You were afraid too. I know." Arthur was already on the phone. He had obtained Robert's number through the building administration. When the businessman answered, his voice was tense. "Arthur, what happened? I'm returning to New York now. I'm on my way." "Mr. Sterling, you need to come home immediately. I found your mother locked in a closet. She's in very bad shape. I've already called an ambulance." There was a silence on the other end of the line. Then Robert's voice came heavy with a mixture of horror and fury that Arthur had never heard before. "What do you mean, locked? Who did this?" "It was your wife, sir. I'm sorry to have to tell you, but I witnessed it all. Mrs. Eleanor was locked from the outside in the closet under the stairs. She spent the whole night in there. Robert felt as if the floor had disappeared beneath his feet. He was in the car on his way to the airport, but now he slammed his foot on the accelerator. "I'll charter a private jet. I'll be there in 2 hours. Please don't leave my mother alone, and don't let Victoria leave that house." "Don't worry, sir. I'm not going anywhere until you arrive." The ambulance arrived 15 minutes later. 2 paramedics entered the house and performed a quick assessment of Eleanor. Vital signs were stable, but she was clearly in a state of severe shock. Moderate dehydration. They needed to take her to the hospital for more detailed exams. As they prepared her for transport, one of the paramedics noticed old marks on Eleanor's arms, small bruises that indicated repeated pressure, being held with force. His gaze met Arthur's, and a silent understanding passed between them. This was not an isolated incident. "I'm going with her," Joan announced, grabbing her purse. "I won't leave her alone at the hospital." Victoria watched everything from upstairs, hidden behind the hallway wall. Her mind was in total panic. She needed to think, she needed to plan. Robert was coming back and he would know everything, but maybe there was still a chance. Maybe she could control the damage. After all, she had something Robert didn't imagine. She had a trump card kept for years. She came down the stairs trying to maintain her composure. Arthur watched her with suspicion as she grabbed her own bag. "I'm going to the hospital too. She's my mother-in-law. I have the right to accompany her." "You are going to stay here and wait for Mr. Robert's arrival," Arthur said firmly. "That is not a suggestion." Victoria glared at him with fury in her eyes, but realized she had no choice. The superintendent was determined, and worse, he was a witness to everything. She went back to the living room and sat on the sofa, hands folded in her lap, trying to appear calm while inside her world was collapsing. At the hospital, Eleanor was taken to an emergency room. The doctors performed a series of tests. In addition to dehydration and emotional shock, they found something more disturbing. There were signs of prolonged stress, untreated, high blood pressure, and when they examined her body more closely, they discovered small lesions that indicated repeated episodes of confinement. Marks on her shoulders, superficial scratches on her hands, signs of someone who had fought against cramped spaces more than once. The doctor in charge, Dr. Helen Anderson, was a 50-year-old woman with vast experience in delicate cases. She sat beside the bed where Eleanor rested, now connected to an IV and with her vital signs being monitored. "Mrs. Eleanor, I need to ask you some questions. You are safe here. No one is going to hurt you." Eleanor looked at her with tired eyes. She felt so exhausted she could barely keep her eyes open. But something in the doctor's gentle voice made her want to speak. For the first time in years, someone was actually listening. "This has happened before, hasn't it? You've been put in that closet other times." Eleanor nodded slowly, tears starting to roll again. "When he travels, when she thinks I did something wrong, when she wants to punish me for existing." Dr. Helen felt anger rise, but kept her voice calm and professional. "How long has this been happening?" "Years," whispered Eleanor. "Since she married my son. In the beginning it was just words, then it kept getting worse." Joan was sitting on the other side of the bed, holding Eleanor's free hand. "I witnessed a lot, Doctor. I even have a video recorded. I sent it to an email by accident, but it's there. It's proof of what she did." Dr. Helen made careful notes. "I'll need to include all of this in the medical report. This information could be very important. And I want you to know, Mrs. Eleanor, that you are not alone now. We are going to ensure you get all the help you need." Meanwhile, Robert was in a private jet he had rented in a hurry. Sitting alone in the luxurious cabin, he couldn't stop thinking. He took out his laptop again and watched the video one more time. Every word from Victoria was like a stab. How had he been so blind? How had he allowed this to happen under his own roof? He thought of all the times his mother tried to tell him something, and he was too busy to listen. All the occasions he arrived home, and she was always in her room, always quiet, always appearing to be fine. Victoria always had an explanation, always had an excuse, and he always believed her because it was easier to believe. Robert also thought of his son. Michael was only 5 years old. What had that boy witnessed? What kind of example was being set for him? The child was growing up in a house where cruelty was hidden behind fake smiles and well-constructed lies. His phone rang. It was an unknown number. He answered. "Mr. Robert Sterling." "Yes, who is this?" "I am Dr. Helen Anderson from St. Jude's Hospital. I am taking care of your mother. I'd like to inform you about her condition." Robert sat up straighter. "How is she?" "Physically, she will recover. She is dehydrated and in shock, but her vital signs are stable. However, I need to talk to you about something more serious. We found evidence of previous confinement situations. Your mother reported that this has been happening for years." Robert's voice failed. "I didn't know. I swear I didn't know anything." "I believe you, sir," the doctor said gently. "But now that you know, you're going to need to make some important decisions. Your mother needs protection, and there are legal issues that will likely arise." "I will do everything necessary," Robert promised. "I'm returning to New York now. I'll be there in less than an hour." When he hung up, Robert rested his head in his hands. He felt the crushing weight of guilt. His mother had suffered so much for so long, and he was completely oblivious. Too busy building his empire, achieving success, while the woman who had sacrificed everything for him withered away in her own home. Back at the Upper East Side mansion, Victoria paced back and forth in the living room. Arthur remained there, sitting in an armchair, watching her every move. He had called the building administration, explaining the situation and asking someone to cover his shift. He wasn't leaving until Robert arrived. Victoria finally stopped pacing and looked at him. "You don't understand anything. That old woman is manipulative. She pretends to be a victim, but she actually tries to control everything. She tries to make me look like the villain." Arthur stared at her expressionlessly. "I saw with my own eyes a 73-year-old lady locked in a dark closet. There is no manipulation in that. There is only cruelty." Victoria was about to respond when she heard the sound of a car braking sharply in the driveway. Her heart raced. Robert had arrived, and for the first time in her marriage, she felt genuine fear of her husband. The front door burst open. Robert entered like a storm, his eyes red with rage and something deeper, a visceral pain that transformed his features. He saw Arthur first. "Where is she?" "At the hospital, sir. Joan went with her. The doctors said she'll be fine physically, but she's very shaken." Robert nodded, and then his eyes met Victoria's. She was pale, her hands clutched against her body. She tried to smile, tried to start an explanation, but he raised his hand, cutting her off. "No, I don't want to hear your lies now. I saw the video. I saw what you did. I heard what you said to my mother." Victoria's blood ran cold. "What video?" Robert took out his phone and showed the screen. She recognized the scene immediately. It was the video Joan had recorded. Her face grew even paler. How had he gotten that? "It doesn't matter how I got it," Robert said, as if reading her thoughts. "What matters is that now I know everything. I know what you did to my mother. I know how long this has been happening, and I know I failed miserably in protecting her." Victoria tried to regain control. "Robert, you need to listen to me. Your mother is difficult. She doesn't accept that I run this house. She tries to challenge me all the time. I was just trying to maintain order." "Order?" Robert's voice came out low and dangerous. "You call locking an elderly woman in a dark closet all night maintaining order? It was only for a few hours, for her to reflect, for her to learn." Robert took a step forward, and Victoria instinctively backed away. "My mother spent Christmas Eve locked in a closet, alone, scared, because of you. And you still try to justify it." That was when Victoria realized that arguments wouldn't work anymore. She needed to use her final card. With an expression that shifted from fragility to something more calculating, she spoke. "Before you do anything you'll regret, Robert, I suggest you think carefully. I have documents, I have information, things you wouldn't want coming to light." Robert stopped, his eyes narrowing. "What are you talking about?" Victoria smiled, but it was a cold, threatening smile. "You think I don't know about the offshore accounts, about the contracts with shell companies, about the negotiations that border on illegal? I have copies of everything, and if you try to push me away, if you try to punish me for what happened to your mother, I'll ensure all of it goes public. Your company, your reputation, everything will be destroyed." The silence that followed was heavy. Arthur watched everything in shock. Robert felt the trap closing around him. Victoria wasn't just cruel. She was calculating, poisonous, and she had prepared for this moment for a long time. But before anyone could respond, the doorbell rang. It was two people wearing formal clothes. They introduced themselves as social workers. They had been alerted by the hospital following Dr. Helen's report. They had come to investigate Mrs. Eleanor's situation and evaluate the safety of the residents. The revelation was only beginning, and no one there imagined how deep that abyss would still go. The social workers entered the mansion with a professional demeanor that immediately changed the atmosphere of the room. The elder one, a woman around 50 named Martha, introduced herself firmly. "We are from Adult Protective Services. We received an urgent call from St. Jude's Hospital regarding a situation involving Mrs. Eleanor Sterling. We need to ask some questions and inspect the residence." Victoria felt panic rise in her throat, but she forced a polite smile. "Of course, feel free. There was a misunderstanding this morning, but everything is being resolved." Martha exchanged a look with her younger colleague, Caroline, and both immediately noticed the tension in the air. Robert stepped forward. "I am Robert Sterling, Eleanor's son. I just arrived from DC after being informed of what happened to my mother." He cast a cutting look at Victoria. "And it wasn't a misunderstanding. It was something much more serious." Arthur also introduced himself. "I was the one who found Mrs. Eleanor locked in the closet under the stairs. She spent the whole night there. She was in a state of shock when we got her out." Caroline took notes on a clipboard while Martha continued. "We're going to need to see that closet, and also speak with every person present in the house when the incident occurred." Over the next hour, the social workers conducted a thorough inspection. They photographed the closet under the stairs, noting the cramped space and deplorable conditions. They found scratches on the inner walls, marks from hands that had tried to push the door. The external lock confirmed it was impossible to leave from the inside without help. It was irrefutable physical evidence of confinement. Next, they went up to Eleanor's room. The room was far too Spartan for someone living in a mansion of that size. There was no significant personal decoration besides the wooden box Eleanor kept so dearly. The cold white walls, the lack of basic comfort, everything indicated deliberate isolation. It was Caroline who found the drawings. They were hidden behind a small piece of furniture near the window. They were crumpled sheets of paper, some torn at the edges, childish drawings made with colored pencils. Martha picked one up and her heart tightened. The image showed 3 figures, a small one, clearly a child, a larger one with yellow hair drawn in an exaggerated way, and a third figure, smaller and hunched, with eyes represented as downward strokes like tears. "There are more here," Caroline said, collecting other drawings. One showed a closed door with a figure on the other side. Another depicted what appeared to be someone alone in a dark corner. They were a child's scribbles, but they told a devastating story. Michael had witnessed everything, and in the innocence of his 5 years, he had tried to document what he saw the only way he knew how. Martha came down the stairs with the drawings in her hands and found Robert sitting on the living room sofa, his head in his hands. "Mr. Sterling, I need to show you something." She held out the papers. Robert took the drawings and felt as if he'd been punched in the stomach. He immediately recognized his son's hand. Those were Michael's drawings, and they showed exactly what Victoria had done to his mother. His son, a small and innocent child, had witnessed everything. He had seen his grandmother suffer and, without fully understanding what was happening, had tried to express that pain through art. "Where were these drawings?" he asked in a raspy voice. "In your mother's room, hidden behind a piece of furniture. I believe your son left them there for her as a form of comfort." Tears began to roll down Robert's face. He had failed not only his mother but also his son. Michael had grown up witnessing situations no child should ever see, and Robert had been too busy, too absent, to notice. Victoria, watching from a distance, felt the ground disappear beneath her feet. Michael's drawings were proof she hadn't anticipated. She couldn't claim a misunderstanding or confusion when there was visual evidence created by her own son. A child didn't lie in their drawings. They only depicted what they saw. Martha turned her attention to Victoria. "Mrs. Sterling, I need you to accompany me for a private conversation. Caroline, please continue documenting the residence." In the dining room, away from the others, Martha sat across from Victoria. Her expression was serious and professional. "I'll be direct. The evidence indicates a systematic pattern of emotional neglect and confinement of a vulnerable elderly person. This is very serious. Furthermore, it appears a child was repeatedly exposed to these traumatic situations." Victoria tried to maintain her composure. "I took care of my mother-in-law for years. I gave her a roof, food, everything she needed. If at times I needed to be firm, it was for her own good." "Being firm does not include locking someone in a closet all night," Martha replied bluntly, "and it certainly doesn't include exposing a child to this kind of toxic environment. I will be recommending that Mrs. Eleanor does not return to this house until protection measures are established, and I will also suggest psychological counseling for your son." "You can't do that," Victoria said, her voice finally revealing desperation. "This is my home. Michael is my son. It is Mr. Roberts' house, technically, and Michael is a child who needs protection, just like Mrs. Eleanor. My recommendations will go into an official report that will be sent to the competent authorities." Meanwhile, at the hospital, Eleanor was beginning to recover physically. The IV had helped with the dehydration, and she could now keep her eyes open for longer periods. Joan remained by her side, holding her hand, offering words of comfort. "Joan," Eleanor said in a weak voice, "thank you for staying with me. You were always kind when no one was looking." Joan squeezed her hand affectionately. "I should have done more. I should have had courage sooner." Dr. Helen entered the room with a tablet in her hands. "Mrs. Eleanor, how are you feeling?" "Better, doctor, physically at least." "That's good, but I want to talk about the next steps. You cannot return to that house while the situation is not completely resolved. I will recommend that you stay in a safe environment, perhaps with your son, or in a temporary assisted living facility if you prefer." Eleanor nodded slowly. "I just want to see my grandson. I need to know he's okay." "I'm sure that will be arranged," the doctor assured her. "Your son is being informed of everything right now." Back at the mansion, Robert was going up the stairs toward Michael's room. He needed to see his son, hug him, protect him. He opened the door slowly. Michael was sitting on the floor, surrounded by toys, but he wasn't playing. He just stared out the window with an expression far too distant for a 5-year-old child. "Michael," Robert called softly. The boy turned and his eyes lit up when he saw his father. "Daddy, you're back." Robert knelt and opened his arms. Michael ran and threw himself into them. Father and son stayed hugged for a long moment. Robert felt his heart breaking. How had he not noticed the weight his son was carrying? "Michael, I need to talk to you about something important. Can you be honest with me?" The boy nodded, but his eyes showed fear. "Am I going to be grounded?" "No, my son. You did nothing wrong. In fact, it was the adults who were wrong. I was wrong." Robert took a deep breath. "Tell me, did you see when Mommy got angry with Grandma?" Michael looked down, biting his lip. His voice came out in a whisper. "Mommy said bad things. She said Grandma got in the way. Sometimes she put Grandma in that dark place under the stairs." Robert felt bile rise. "And you saw that happen many times?" The boy nodded, tears starting to roll. "I made drawings for Grandma so she wouldn't be sad. I left them in her room. But Mommy told me not to tell you. She said you'd be mad at us." Robert pulled his son closer. "I would never be mad at you for telling the truth. Never. And I'm sorry, son. I'm sorry for not noticing, for not protecting you and Grandma." "Is Grandma going to be okay?" Michael asked with a choked voice. "She will. And so will you. I'm going to take care of you both. I promise." At that moment, Robert made a decision. No matter what Victoria threatened to reveal, no matter what might happen to his company or reputation, none of it was worth more than the safety of his mother and his son. He had built an empire, but he had almost lost his family in the process. It was time to get his priorities straight. He went down the stairs with Michael in his arms and found Martha finishing the report. The social worker looked at him seriously. "Mr. Sterling, we've concluded the inspection. My report will be clear about the gravity of the situation. I strongly recommend you take immediate measures to protect both your mother and your son." "I've already decided. Victoria is leaving this house today. I will arrange for my mother to live with me and Michael in a safe environment, and I will seek all necessary support, legal and psychological, for all of us." Victoria, who was listening from the dining room, came out like a fury. "You can't kick me out of my own home. This is not your home," Robert said with a calmness that hid the inner storm. "It's in my name, and after what you did, you aren't staying another minute here. You can pack your bags or leave with the clothes on your back. You choose." "I warned you, Robert. I have the documents. I have a way to destroy you." Robert looked at her with an expression Victoria had never seen before. It was a mixture of deep disappointment and unshakable determination. "Do whatever you want, Victoria. Release whatever you have. I'll deal with the consequences. But my mother and my son will not stay under your control for one more second." Arthur, watching everything, felt a deep respect for Robert at that moment. The businessman had finally found what really mattered. Victoria realized she had lost control, lost the game, lost everything. Her expression changed from anger to something more calculating. "Fine, I'll leave. But this isn't over. My lawyer will be in touch. I want a fair division of assets, and I want visitation rights to my son." "Visitation rights will be discussed with social workers and psychologists present," Martha intervened. "Based on what I've seen today, any contact with the child will need to be supervised until a full evaluation is done." Victoria stomped up the stairs, slamming the master bedroom door. She began throwing clothes and personal items into suitcases carelessly. Her mind was already working on the next move. She wasn't going to give up so easily. She had the compromising documents about Robert. She had knowledge of the family business, and she had contacts, expensive lawyers who could turn that situation in her favor. But there was something Victoria didn't know, something that was about to completely change the game. Robert picked up his phone and made a call. "I need to talk to you. It's urgent. Yes, about those contracts we discussed last month. I need your help." On the other end of the line was Richard, Robert's brother. Richard worked in the family business, taking care of the financial and administrative side. He was always seen as the reliable one, the organized one, the one Robert placed total trust in to keep the business running while he traveled. Richard listened to the summary of what had happened, and his voice sounded worried. My God, Robert, I didn't know anything about this. Victoria always seemed so appropriate. Yeah, I didn't know either. But now I need your help. She's threatening to release information about questionable contracts. Do you know anything about that? There was a pause on the other end, a pause that was too long. Robert, we need to talk in person. The tone of his brother's voice set off an alarm in Robert's mind. Richard, what are you talking about? Not over the phone. I'm coming over now. I'll be there in 20 minutes. When the call ended, Robert was left with a strange feeling in his stomach. There was something in Richard's voice he couldn't identify, something that sounded like guilt. Martha and Caroline finished the report and prepared to leave. Mr. Sterling, you will receive an official copy of our report in 48 hours. I recommend you seek legal counsel on the next steps. And please keep us informed of Mrs. Eleanor's whereabouts for follow-up. I'll do that. Thank you for your work. After the social workers left, the mansion fell into a heavy silence. Michael had fallen asleep on the sofa, emotionally exhausted. Joan called from the hospital saying Eleanor was stable and resting. Arthur offered to stay until Victoria completely left the house, ensuring nothing was destroyed or taken improperly. Victoria came down with 3 suitcases and an expression of pure coldness. She didn't look at Robert. She didn't say goodbye to her sleeping son. She just walked toward the door. But before leaving, she turned one last time. You're going to regret this, Robert. You'll see how much you're going to regret this. The door closed behind her, and for the first time in years, the Sterling mansion breathed a sigh of relief. But the storm was far from over, because Robert still didn't know the full truth. He still didn't know that the betrayal came from much closer than he imagined, and that the coming days would bring revelations that would shake everything he thought he knew about his own family. The next day dawned with a grey sky over New York, heavy clouds threatening rain at any moment. Robert had barely slept. He had spent the whole night thinking about that mysterious call, trying to identify the voice, speculating about what secrets might still be hidden. Wasn't it enough to discover that his wife had psychologically tortured his mother for years? What else could there be? At 11:30, in the morning, Robert parked his car near the Manhattan Cafe, a traditional establishment downtown that had existed for decades. The place was busy as always, filled with executives on lunch breaks, students with laptops, and tourists admiring the classic architecture of the place. Robert entered and looked for someone who seemed to be waiting. It didn't take long to identify him. Sitting at a back table, wearing a dark suit and sunglasses even indoors, was a man Robert recognized immediately. His heart raced. It was Franklin, his younger brother. Franklin was 37 years old, 5 years younger than Robert. He had always been the more distant son, the one who chose to pursue a career in corporate law instead of entering the family business. Robert trusted him completely. Franklin handled all the legal aspects of the company, had power of attorney to act in Robert's name, and knew every financial detail of the empire they had built together. Or so Robert thought. Franklin, Robert said, approaching the table, his voice tense. Was it you who called? Sit down, brother. We need to talk. Franklin's voice was different. There was a coldness there that Robert had never noticed before. Robert sat down, his muscles tense. What is all this about? What secrets did you mention? Franklin took off his sunglasses, revealing eyes that were tired but calculating. First of all, I want you to know that I have no remorse for what I did. Everything was thought out, planned, and executed with precision. The only thing I didn't count on was Victoria's incompetence in keeping things discreet. Robert felt his blood run cold. What are you talking about? Franklin ordered a coffee from the waiter before continuing. You were always the golden boy, weren't you? The firstborn that Mum adored, the one who had all the support to start the company. Meanwhile, I was forgotten, pushed aside, treated as secondary. Do you know how many times our mother compared my achievements to yours? How many times I heard that I should be more like you? Robert shook his head, incredulous. Franklin, that's not true. Mum always loved you equally. She always loved you more, Franklin corrected with bitterness. But that's beside the point now. What matters is that I realized years ago that if I wanted what I deserved, I would have to take it. And that's exactly what I did. The waiter brought the coffee. Franklin drank slowly, savoring the moment before continuing. I met Victoria before you did. Did you know that? She was an intern at the firm where I worked, an ambitious, intelligent woman, completely willing to do whatever was necessary to move up in life. It was my idea to introduce her to you. Robert felt as if the floor were disappearing beneath his feet. You orchestrated my marriage? I orchestrated much more than that. Franklin smiled, but it was a smile without warmth. Victoria and I had a deal. She would marry you, gain your trust, and together we would work to isolate our mother. You see, Robert, as long as Mum is alive and lucid, she has rights to part of the family estate. The house you live in, for example, is still partially in her name. There are investments, stocks, properties, everything she accumulated over the years. And you wanted to take that from her, whispered Robert, his voice raspy with horror. We wanted what belongs to us by right, Franklin replied coldly. The plan was simple. Victoria would convince you that Mum was losing her lucidity. Episodes of confusion, forgetfulness, erratic behavior. Gradually you would agree to seek specialized help, eventually a legal conservatorship. With Mum under conservatorship, I would take over as legal guardian, since I have power of attorney and I'm a lawyer. And then, the entire estate would be gradually transferred to us. You are monsters, Robert said, his hands shaking with rage. My own mother, your own mother. Franklin shrugged. Business is business. But Victoria started getting careless. The humiliations, the isolation, that was fine, that was part of the plan. But locking Mum in closets, that went too far. It was emotional, personal, and it drew too much attention. When I heard you had discovered everything, I realized I needed to distance myself from Victoria before she dragged me down with her. That's why you called, Robert realized. To save yourself, to throw all the blame on her. Exactly. Franklin finished his coffee. I'm going to testify against Victoria. I'll say she acted alone, that I didn't know anything. I have documents that prove my version, emails where I supposedly questioned the treatment she gave Mom, conversation logs where I showed concern. Robert stood up abruptly, knocking over his chair. You're not going to get away with this. Franklin remained seated, calm. I have no evidence against me, Robert. Everything was done through Victoria. She signed the documents, she took care of Mom, she made the choices. I'm just the family lawyer who, unfortunately, was deceived by his manipulative sister-in-law. You forgot something, a voice said behind them. Both brothers turned. Mariana Fields, the social worker, was there accompanied by 2 private investigators Robert had hired the night before, following a hunch, and all of them were wearing small, discreet recorders. Every word of this conversation was recorded, Mariana said with satisfaction, and it will be handed over to the authorities later today. Franklin's face went pale. That's illegal, recording without consent. Actually, informed one of the investigators, Mr. Robert hired us to investigate possible financial irregularities and family misconduct. We have legal authorization to document evidence, and you just confessed to participation in a scheme of manipulation and attempted misappropriation of assets through fraudulent means. Franklin tried to stand up, but the second investigator blocked his exit. Robert looked at his brother with a mixture of deep sadness and disgust. I trusted you. I gave you access to everything, and you used that to destroy our mother. Franklin didn't answer. His mask of confidence had finally fallen, revealing only panic and despair. The investigators escorted Franklin out of the cafe. Mariana stayed with Robert for a moment. Mr. Sterling, I know this must be devastating, discovering that both your wife and your brother conspired against your mother. Robert sat down again, resting his head in his hands. I failed her in every possible way. I didn't see the threats that were right under my nose. But now you see, Mariana said gently, and you're doing the right thing. That's what matters. In the weeks that followed, the full truth came to light. The investigators found an extensive trail of manipulated documents, suspicious financial transfers, and communications between Franklin and Victoria that proved the conspiracy. Franklin had gradually diverted company resources, creating a complex network of ghost accounts and hidden investments. The ultimate goal was to declare Eleanor incompetent, take over guardianship, and then slowly drain all the assets still in her name. Victoria, confronted with the evidence and realizing Franklin had betrayed her by confessing and trying to pin all the blame on her, finally broke. She provided the investigators with all the details of the scheme, including recordings of conversations with Franklin where they openly discussed the plans. It was her revenge against the man who had tried to use her as a scapegoat. The legal situation unfolded quickly. Franklin was removed from all his roles in the company and faced lawsuits for embezzlement, document fraud, and conspiracy. Victoria, although she had collaborated with the investigations, still faced severe consequences for her actions against Eleanor. Both would have a long road ahead in the courts, but for Robert the most important thing was his mother. Eleanor was discharged from the hospital after a week. Robert completely transformed her room in the mansion. The walls were painted in warm tones of beige and light yellow, new curtains let in the sunlight, and framed family photographs were everywhere. He brought back all the personal objects Victoria had hidden over the years, every precious memory Eleanor kept from the past. Her room now had life. It had color. It had love. Michael also underwent changes. Robert took him weekly to child therapy sessions, where the boy slowly processed everything he had witnessed. The sad drawings were gradually replaced by more cheerful images: flowers, sun, the family together, and smiling. One afternoon, 3 months after the events of that fateful Christmas, Eleanor was sitting in the mansion's garden. Robert had hired a landscaper to revitalize the space, and now there were roses blooming, a small pond with koi fish, and wooden benches under the shade of century-old magnolia trees. Joan brought iced tea and cookies. Since Robert had taken full control of the household management, she worked under completely different conditions. A dignified salary, respected time off, and above all an environment of respect and kindness. "Mrs. Eleanor, I brought your favorite cookies," Joan said with a genuine smile. "Thank you, dear. Sit here with me for a while." Joan sat on the bench beside Eleanor. The two women had developed a deep bond through shared trauma and gradual healing. "Sometimes I still can't believe everything has changed so much," Eleanor confessed. "I wake up in the morning and still expect to see those cold white walls. I still expect to hear her voice telling me I'm a burden." Joan held her hand. "But then you wake up for real and see that you're safe, that you're loved, that you have value." Eleanor smiled, but there were tears in her eyes. "Do you know what hurt me the most? It wasn't the closet, it wasn't the cruel words. It was the feeling that my own son didn't see me, that I had become invisible to the person I loved most in this world." "He sees you now," Joan said, "and he's never going to stop seeing you." As if summoned by the words, Robert appeared in the garden holding Michael's hand. The boy ran to his grandmother and jumped into her lap. "Grandma, Grandma, look what I drew today at school." It was a colorful drawing of a house with 3 people in front. He pointed to each figure. "This is Daddy, this is Grandma, and this is me. We are a happy family." Eleanor hugged her grandson, finally letting the tears fall. "Yes, we are, my love. We are a happy family." Robert sat on the grass at his mother's feet. He had stepped back from business, delegating more responsibilities and prioritizing quality time with his family. He had discovered that the empire he built was worth nothing if it cost the happiness of the people he loved. "Mom," he began after a moment, "I want you to know that I'm going to spend the rest of my life making up for the time I wasted, for the moments I wasn't present, for the times I chose work over you." Eleanor placed her hand on her son's hair, caressing it as she did when he was a child. "Son, you've already given me the greatest gift possible. You saw me. After so much time being invisible, you finally saw me, and you acted. That is all a mother can ask for." "It's not enough," Robert insisted, "but it's a start." That night, for the first time in years, the family dined together at the large dining room table. There were no more isolated meals in cold rooms. There were no more tense silences. There was conversation, laughter, Michael telling school stories, Eleanor sharing memories of the past, and Robert planning a trip to the beach for the next vacation. Joan was serving the meal, but Robert insisted she sit at the table too. "You are part of this family," he said, And in this house, family eats together. It was during dessert that Eleanor made an announcement. I've started writing again, not just a diary of pain, but stories. Good memories. I want Michael to know where he came from, the strength that exists in our family. I want him to grow up knowing that even in the darkest moments, there is always hope for light. Robert smiled, proud. I'll publish it for you. We'll turn your words into a book. Michael clapped his hands excitedly. I'm going to read all of Grandma's stories. Weeks later, the day of Victoria and Franklin's preliminary hearing arrived. Robert did not attend. He decided that giving them attention would be giving them a power they no longer deserved. Instead, he spent the day with Eleanor visiting an art museum she had always wanted to see, but never had the chance. They walked through the galleries, admiring paintings by American masters and sculptures that told stories of resistance and triumph. At one point, they stopped before a canvas showing an elderly woman surrounded by golden light, a serene smile on her face. It's beautiful, Eleanor commented. It's you, Robert said. Strong, a survivor, full of your own light. Eleanor looked at her son with love. Do you know what I learned from all of this? That silence can be both a prison and a weapon. I silenced my pain thinking I was protecting you, but silence only fed the evil. Now I've learned to speak, to exist out loud, to occupy space without apologizing. And I learned to listen, Robert replied, to really listen, not just wait for my turn to speak, but to be present, attentive, and available. They left the museum holding hands just as they did when Robert was a child. The afternoon sun bathed New York in shades of orange and gold. The city continued its frantic pace, but for them that moment was one of absolute peace. Months turned into a year. The Upper East Side mansion was sold. Robert bought a smaller, cozier house in a tree-lined neighborhood where Michael could play in the yard and Eleanor had a garden to tend. They didn't need ostentation. They needed a home. Franklin eventually accepted a plea deal. He lost all rights to the family business, had to return every cent embezzled, and faced professional consequences that ended his legal career. Victoria, without resources or allies, faced more severe measures. Both became examples of how greed and cruelty destroy not only the victims, but also the perpetrators. Eleanor flourished. She returned to painting classes, something she had abandoned decades ago. She joined a book club with other ladies in the neighborhood. She made true friends, laughed genuinely, and lived fully. The marks of trauma would never completely disappear, but they no longer defined her. Michael grew up surrounded by love and examples of how to face adversity with dignity. He learned early on that family is not just blood, but the daily choice to be present, to care, and to value. And Robert, the businessman who almost lost everything that really mattered by being blind to the right things, was transformed. He continued to be successful in business, but now he measured success differently. Not in figures or achievements, but in shared dinners, sincere laughter, and the certainty that the people he loved knew exactly how much they were loved. On a Christmas night, exactly 1 year after that terrible eve, the family gathered again. But this time, it was a genuine celebration. The tree glowed in the corner of the room, presents piled underneath, the aroma of Christmas pudding and roasted turkey perfuming the whole house. Eleanor was sitting in the main armchair, Michael in her lap, while Robert served wine and juice. Joan had been invited to bring her own children, who played with Michael as if they were cousins. When the clock struck midnight, they hugged. And in that hug was everything that mattered. Forgiveness, a new beginning, unconditional love, and the silent promise that they would never again allow evil to hide behind fake smiles and convenient silences. Eleanor looked around at the people gathered in her new home and felt a deep gratitude. She had survived the darkness, she had found light again, and more importantly, she had reclaimed her voice, her dignity, and her place in the world. Christmas, which had once been synonymous with pain and loneliness, now represented rebirth. And as the night went on with music, stories, and laughter, everyone knew that was just the first of many celebrations to come. Because finally, after so much suffering, they had found their way back to each other, and this time, they wouldn't let anything or anyone separate them again. The end. Dear listeners, we hope the story of Eleanor and Robert has deeply touched your heart. If you were moved by this journey of pain, revelation, and new beginnings, leave your like, subscribe to the channel, and tell us in the comments which moment marked you the most. Every day we bring intense stories like this one, revealing the deepest side of the human soul, the challenges of family relationships, and the strength needed to break cycles of suffering. Your participation is essential for us to continue bringing these narratives that make us reflect on our own relationships and choices. We look forward to seeing you in the next episode with another story that will stir your emotions and make you think about the true meaning of family, love and forgiveness.